The Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies Conflict Management Program ventured to Ethiopia in January 2020 to research Ethiopia at a time of transition to democracy. The research team met with government officials and civilians over the 10 days in Addis Ababa and a brief day trip to Holeta. Our conclusions are compiled in our report titled Ethiopia Between Hope and Peril. Ethiopia is at a transition point in its history. Ever since the appointment of Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed in 2018, the nation has been undergoing political changes that have impacted Ethiopian society. Briefings with Ethiopian government officials and civilians displayed that they were generally content with the new policy reforms. However, ethnic differences in Ethiopian society are showing the cracks in Ethiopian nationhood and solidarity under Prime Minister Abiy's reform agenda, fueled by the federalist government system outlined in the constitution. Under the federal system of government, Ethiopia is ruled by the federal government while also being divided into regional states. The prime minister is the head of government and is chosen by the parliament. Beyond this federal government, there are regional governments that have some sovereignty over policies in their region. There are 9 ethno-linguistically based regional states: Afar, Amhara, Benishangul-Gumuz, Gambela, Harar, Oromia, Somali, Southern Nations, Nationalities and Peoples Region, also known as SNNPR, and Tigray. Each regional state has its own police force, militia, paramilitary group, and in some cases their own constitution. This places some sovereign power over each regional state, which also triggers ethnic conflict between these regional states. These internal ethnic conflicts are what aggravate Ethiopia's struggle with internally displaced people, or IDPs. According to the United Nations, or UN, ethnic conflict and natural disasters are the leading causes for IDPs. While natural disasters are unfortunate events that cannot be mitigated, ethnic conflict, on the other hand, is a more worrying concern. According to data from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR, Ethiopia was the home to the greatest increase in IDPs in the world, being the host of almost 2.9 million new internal displacements in 2018, majority of which were caused by ethnic conflict. Of these 2.9 million IDPs, only 412,000 were able to find safe living conditions. This desperate situation for Ethiopian IDPs calls for government action to mitigate further conflict, but so far government action has been counterproductive to national needs. For example, non-governmental organizations and UN agencies reported that the Ethiopian government was responsible for dismantling IDP camps and forcibly moving IDPs back home when their homes were not safe for repatriation. Additional reports claim that the government of Ethiopia blocked access of NGO workers and volunteers to IDP sites, halting aid and support for those in need. From interviews with interlocutors in Ethiopia, IDP issues are considered taboo in the country, which halts many progressive talks towards planning aid and support for IDPs. However, it is not all doom and gloom, as recently the government has taken some positive steps. In February 2020, Prime Minister Abiy authorized the signing of the African Union Kampala Convention, an agreement made by the African Union member states for the protection and assistance of internally displaced people. Furthermore, the government has agreed to increase coordination with UN agencies and international NGOs to support IDPs. As the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, or ITMC, expects the number of IDPs to rise in subsequent years, these positive signs bring hope to an improved national policy in Ethiopia to aid IDPs. The dire IDP issues are hidden behind many refugee successes in the country. Ethiopia takes pride in being the most welcoming nation to refugees. In fact, Ethiopia has a mandate in its constitution that warrants support by the government in assisting refugees. Therefore, the government has its own department on refugee support, the Agency for Refugee and Returnee Affairs, known as ARRA. Furthermore, Ethiopia has been among the first nations to sign on and ratify any international framework that assists refugees and their safety. This has led Ethiopia to adopt an ambitious goal of eradicating all refugee camps by 2030, where all refugees are either assimilated to Ethiopian society or are safely back home in their home countries. To assist this cause, Prime Minister Abiy announced a reinforcement of the 2004 Refugee Proclamation, which would allow refugees to find work within Ethiopia, on top of the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, or CRRF, that the nation adopted in 2016. Much progress has been made in refugee support, and this is significantly comparable to the government's actions towards IDP support, and more parity is required in government action to ensure the safety of all people. At this time, Ethiopia is a busy nation in transition. With recent developments of the COVID-19 pandemic, many of the national reform policies have been deprioritized behind national health and safety. Ethiopian society is more worried about the planned elections of August 2020, which have become uncertain after the importance of social distancing to minimize the threat of the virus. UN agencies report that IDPs and refugees are most vulnerable to the threats of the coronavirus and are seeking to effectively halt the spread of the virus within refugee and IDP camps. With Dr. Tedros Adhanom, an Ethiopian public health researcher at the helm of the World Health Organization, Ethiopians are hopeful that their nation will be stronger by the end of the pandemic. While the government is announcing promising policy changes and reforms, not much progress is seen in enforcing these changes. In order to make progress, Ethiopia will only prosper with the cooperation of society and the government.